From the home offices of Ash and Flo, this is Unbillable Hours, a podcast about professional services marketing. Stick around to listen to our insights, tips, and best practices to improve your firm's marketing and even your career.
So, welcome everyone. Welcome Ash and welcome Brad Yale to this new episode of Unbillable Hours. We just talked about it, but I'll repeat it for the listeners, right? Brad joins us here. He's a VP and Director of Digital Content Planning and Data at Medical Knowledge Group, which means he knows a bunch of things about shaping and then driving data-informed or data-driven content strategies. And we want to talk to him about that. He also hosts his own podcast, which I'll let you speak to that as well. It dabbles in a similar realm than Unbillable Hours because you talk about agency business models, right? As in creative or advertising agencies. Do you want to say two words about that? Yeah, Brad?
Yeah, sure thing. So, Flo, you hit it dead on the head. First, Flo and Ash, nice to see you. Ash, nice to meet you. Flo, nice to talk to you again. So, to my daily gig, I am a data strategist and a content strategist and a search strategist. So, I'm someone who has my mind in spreadsheets all day long. And I'm essentially saying, all right, based upon what the market is saying, based upon what the brand is needing, based upon what we actually put into market, what can we do better in terms of content executions, digital strategy? How does the actual data impact what we're putting into market and why? How does it actually actualize within market? From the sense of Agency Pod, it is essentially just a podcast talking to agency professionals, clients, vendors from all over the agency world in every single vertical to have a conversation that says, we work in this business model that I think has been broken since 1950, and how can we improve it? That's the basis of it.
All right. Speaking about broken things or fixing things, we wanted to invite you on because I think the question of what you just said there, how do you bring together the market demand or the market interests with in the consulting context, it would be the need of the business, like the services they want to talk about, right? How do you bridge those two? That's something we're very interested in because Ash and I sometimes talk about this. It's often the missing middle, if you will. Like consulting firms tend to be good at doing high level thought leadership and brand building stuff at the top, if you will, of the pyramid. And at the bottom, there's the sales enablement. They're usually doing okay there. So the middle piece, like where do you take a client from your high level thinking into your actual services without getting super spammy, like the cliched used car salesman, right? So that's a struggle for many firms. So I guess my first question would be, how do you usually do this? Like how do you help your clients? Can you give us an overview of your process or how this usually works?
I'm going to give you what in the end is going to be a boring as white bread answer, but I think it makes sense. Every project you have in, whether you're starting a new business perspective or you're jumping into a brand that's already established and has, multiple agencies behind it and they're looking for someone else to help out, there is already a scope of work and an execution that is underway, right? They already have a way of working, how they do things, what they want their agencies to do, how they want their brand, and how they want their vendors to work within that. In most of those cases, it always seems like the brand is saying, all right, we are scoping you to produce XYZ tactic and strategy over a course of time. But because we as the brand know the brand inside and out, and we as the brand know the audience and the segments and the content inside and out, we don't really expect you as the agency to bill us time to do landscape research, whether going into a project or whether through the entire course of it, because obviously the market changes, the brand change, the needs of the audience changes. There's a disconnect there normally that says, because we know this, why are you billing us for stuff that we already know internally? And I think all agencies need to do a better job at saying, when we take on a business, how do we actually bill out a scope of work? So the scope of work on the front of the project allows for landscape research, allows for the insights and the research and the data to say, this is what's taking place on the market side of point of view, whether it's in search or social, or whether it's the competitor space, or whether you're researching an RM market, whatever it might be. And then likewise, on a monthly, quarterly, bi-yearly basis, to continually conduct that research to say, all right, in January, your main concerns as the brand was this. And also in January, the market concerns were X. But by June, that's moved on because your segments are now asking different questions. They want different information. And your brand is also, maybe there's a new pipeline if you're in medical and pharma. Maybe there's a new drug that's on the market that they're going to start aiming for. Or maybe that their RM program is starting to get some feedback that says we need XYZ content. So there needs to be that ability in the scoping of work, which again is the most boring, bland, basic question, but it answers how you allot money over time to do the research and to allow the people on the agency side, the brand side, the vendor side to get together and say, all right, brand, you know your stuff, but from a market perspective, we're going to give you a different insight. Now let's marry that. And that's clearly built into the scope. And the secondary part of that is preparing the client to have that conversation. It's essentially saying, we're going to bring all these different inputs into the process. Now let's sit down and come together and say, all right, input one, let's say the search market, we think you should do X with this. But from a brand perspective, we know you want to stay away from this type of content or this type of messaging. So maybe that is not best for you. That said, where can we marry what the market needs versus what the brand needs? And now you have that conversation to lay the groundwork. So a month in, 2 months in, 6 months in, both sides are talking like that. Both sides are saying, oh, there's valuable input here, and I can see the benefit of it. The last part of this to me is really, once you think through the scope and once you think through the conversation and the presentation to get everyone strategically on the same mind, is then I'm a data strategist. So it's then saying, all right, we're going to do A. What is the measurement plan? What are the KPIs? What are leading indicators? What are we going to learn from this? What are the goals and the things we're going to learn from this to say, we did this. How does it benefit our business? How does it benefit our market segments? How does it benefit us as a collective body going forward to make the best choices for the business and the market that A, drives brand loyalty within those segments, but also from a brand point of view, drives whatever you define as conversions. If it's in healthcare, maybe it's a download of something, maybe it's a doctor discussion guide. If you're in e-commerce, maybe it's a sale on a merchandise item, whatever that might be. But it's defining that so everyone knows going in, this is what we're measuring, and we're weighing against all the inputs and what we're trying to get out of it. It's a very honest conversation that I've learned over time, if I'm being completely honest, that it's a marrying of two inputs. The first input is the performance marketing point of view, right? It's the basic things that we all look at and says, was something clicked? What was the scroll depth? Was something downloaded? Was something converted on? Was the goal that you set in GA or Omniture met, whatever that goal might be? But the other part of it, which I think sometimes gets lost in the sauce, is understanding that the performance metrics cannot be the tail that wags the dog. The measure part of it, Ash, what you're talking about, for me, is saying, what is the brand goal that you're trying to shoot at? What is the true value of a click-through if it then doesn't equate to something like a higher prescription level or a higher sales conversion level or whatever that might be? The metrics part of it are just, to me, a leading indicator to say the measure, the goal of what you're setting is actually being hit and worked on, and we're using, to keep coming back to the dog, the mind as opposed to the tail to wag where we're going. It's that conversation that has to happen to not lose sight of actually what the goals are, because I think we all know from a data point of view, clicks can be misleading in the sense of saying your users are just doing this, let's optimize towards this. But you're not going to get the long game of actually what the real goal is, or you might be too short-sighted. So you have to have a long-term mindset with the short term, and again, see where it meets in the middle. It's a conversation of how do you bridge the gap and how do you make sure that there are some compromises, that one side isn't doing everything.
So when we think about metrics, something that's really interesting with a lot of companies is that they just want to move towards something like building trust and delight. It's much more of a glittery brand experience. How would your customers like it? They don't even have their entire views or their metrics or everything sorted. But before they even get everything, they're just more like, let's think about customer experience, which is a good point. but then let's build consumer trust and delight, or customer trust and delight. What's your take on this?
My answer to you is to stop making glitterware. I work with a few UX designers, and one in particular who is just a badass at what she does, just a great, great mind at UX and UI and CX. And her main complaint after every year I've worked with her is looking at projects and saying, why are you building functional glitterware that looks nice and has that surprise and delight factor to it, but serves no functional goal to the user to say, this is something we're providing you as a service that you can use that benefits whatever it is, whatever vertical you're in. To me, the answer is yes. The campaign, the advertising campaign traditionally has to have the power to stop someone, right? It has to have the power to say, I want to look at this and understand more about this. But once that wears off, your brand goal needs to be what functional tool sets can I give to someone that's going to make them loyal to the brand that I'm working on or working with, and how can I improve their experience through the assets, the abilities that I'm giving to them. If you are solely building a campaign based upon look at the sparkle and the glitter and the glitterware, you're going to fail, because there's going to be another brand behind you that's going to say, all right, we have the same campaign and the same great looks and feel, but also we're providing you a tool set that you can use in your day-to-day life that's going to keep coming back to our brand as opposed to going somewhere else. I think it's the advising of saying agencies need to look at campaigns as saying the campaign, the traditional ad lob, is something that is stopping power. But what keeps someone there is utility. It's the idea of how does this utilize in your life? And if you can build something that does that beneficially for that user, for that segment, that's your hook. That's what matters. Because once you're in, the campaign for that person doesn't mean shit anymore. It's what can you give them to benefit them.
Which I think that's a very interesting concept I'm hearing here between the lines anyways, and you even started there by saying, I think, planning the entire effort and then even budgeting it, right? So that you can, as the campaign runs, right, come back and check and see, is this still resonating? Is it still relevant? And then maybe that expands into what you just said, and is think about how we can keep giving utility to people, even if they've been exposed to the initial messages. That to me is very interesting, and also I think, Ash, something I don't see that being done in professional services world, where yes, there might be research that informs the campaign at the planning stage and stuff gets validated, but then it's just execution for 6 months, right? And no one sort of comes back in the in-between to check, is that actually still relevant? And Ash brought this up in I don't know, a couple of episodes back when he talked about the need from shifting to a more proactive stance of marketing overall, sort of, scanning ahead of what's changing in the marketplace. Are there any events? Is there any stuff going on? And then if that's the case, sort of go back and fold that back into your campaign effort, not just, have the train go straight ahead and rush by the things that are happening in the real world. Can I ask though, how much of that, how often do you find that in a typical campaign, this continued research effort is relevant? Has it increased over time? Is it nowadays you have to tweak something every quarter, whereas in the past probably was once every 2 years? How's that happening?
I think there needs to be a shift, and I'm going through this now, so I can't say I'm fully successful at it yet. And some brands am, and some brands I'm not. I'm going through this now, and some brands understand that the way they budget updates needs to change to a more month-by-month basis to allow that research to actually influence the type of creative that's going to be put onto a site or an own campaign, whatever that might be. And some brands, because of the architecture of the organization and how they run, are still in the mindset of saying, no, we're going to wait for a big product update or a label update, whatever it might be, and we're going to do it once a year. And the advice there is saying, all right, I get it. That's your SOW and that's your way of working. But we would be professionally remiss not to tell you what the market is actively telling every single person to do. And knowing that if you still choose to do that, end of the day, it's your business, it's your money. But professionally, as agencies, we have to say, this is the best practice and let's figure out a way to make it work.
So something we had a guest before talk about something that's actually close to me as well because of my previous roles. It's about horizon scanning. Like, how can we prepare proactively to the changes in the campaign elements, or well, basically the changes in the market? You can't, like, for instance, COVID happened. We couldn't really predict COVID happening entirely, though, you can argue either way. But how do we, like, prepare for things coming up in the horizon? Like, what is the role of metrics and measurements and stuff in sort of like forecasting in a way?
I think to your point of moving benchmarks, moving metrics, rolling averages, absolutely. I think any marketer, any data strategist who looks at it says, look, your benchmark or your average for your performance is going to stay stagnant every single quarter is nonsense. That's a complete bullshit way of thinking. It has to be in the sense of saying, because the audience and the segment and the content and the needs move and change, you have to reassess your averages or your benchmarks once per quarter, once every 6 months, to say what is actually working for us versus what is actually the market goal. What is the market, the industry standard average you might put forward. So yes, I do believe that's absolutely best practice and part of it. To the part of horizon scanning, that's a really interesting thing, because there's the old paradigm that no one can really predict the future. You could surely tell me that tomorrow the sun's going to come up. That's great. But I can say, you know what? Tonight at 11:59, the world might end. Who the hell knows? So I think to the point of horizon scanning, you need to, as a brand and an agency, look and say, where do we think this market is going to go based upon historical truths and also based upon where we think current trends are moving things. However you do that research, whether it's through data platforms, whether it's Google Trends, whether it's a social space, whether it's tracking and monitoring updates in a single space to see where the questions and the content and the conversation has been morphing to over time to try to predict 6 months out, a year out, that is absolutely a worthy endeavor and something agencies should be doing for their brands. But it is also not to say that there shouldn't be an ancillary fallback part of it that says, we think this is going to happen in 6 months to a year. But the reality is, I don't really know. So in that case, what is our core operating principle to keep us strategically in line with where we want to be, and then start filtering in where we think things are going to happen if it does start to happen? You need to have the both ancillary plans there to say, yes, we think we know what's coming, but also in reality, let's run our core business to meet our market needs and our brand needs. And then as those updates happen, let's start acting on them. Be prepared, but don't always think it's going to really happen.
Yeah, I think the be prepared part is the one Ash likes to talk about, because we find that consulting firms tend to not do a super job at that, and we don't know why that is. Sometimes the legal professions or the tax advisory guys are good at it because they see stuff like there's legislation on the shelf, right, regarding some tax regulations, and then they draw up some statements in case it becomes the law or not or whatever, right? So they prepare some commentary. But in consulting firms, sometimes it's like you can see things, and Ash and I have been there, like Brexit happens, and then after the fact, people line up the studies about Brexit, and we're like, okay, why is this now crazy crunch time wildfire surprise bullshit for everyone, right? We knew this, like we could have done that research and at least lined it up like half a year ago. Like that's one thing. And then, but your point about the incentive plan also makes sense, because it's exactly that type of scenario planning that you say, okay, we see two potential outcomes of this here. Let's prepare let's have 2 legs in the campaign somewhat ready, right? Doesn't have to be perfect, so you can be quick and flexible. But the reality often is we just prepare version A, whatever that is, and then we ram it through. And if there's an obvious miss, we just stop the thing, and all the effort that went into option A just goes to waste. And everybody says, "Yeah, let's not publish this anymore. We can't." And it's really, it will be interesting. It's interesting to think about how that could be done better, right?
So let me ask you guys something, because you're obviously clearly in the industry too, and have seen a lot of different things. To me, again, a lot of this always comes down to the amount of budget and the money a brand has to service the goal they want to service. And a brand might say, all right, you're going to put 2 strategic platforms forward and 2 possible message platforms forward and 2 possible execution forms forward, that's going to cost us double the money. Why the hell would we want to do that? I wonder from your perspective, how have you all both gone in and sold in the idea of saying it's not going to cost you that much more because the creative is going to be just another, few hours or it might be. How do you actually, how have you had those conversations to prove out, yes, we're going to plan multiple different avenues, but it's not going to cost you as much as you think? How have you gone about it?
Well, there is no real budget for that kind of extensive prep when you think about it.
Well, I think to your point about preparing 2 complete parallel or alternative tracks, and then one of them is sort of, there's no return on that investment. I think that's actually not always the scenario. It's often a case of, do you have something that's coming your way? And then we could prepare a statement, or we could have something ready, much like the way newspapers have obituaries for famous people ready, just in case. So there's a certain degree of certainty, and the decision to, if that becomes reality, we will move on this, it's just made early on. I think these are the conversations I usually have, and the case there, just in theory, is I'm not talking about building out the full campaigns and having the posters drawn up and ordering all that stuff. It could be like we are in consulting. It could be like, think through that and then maybe have a couple of people ready who could write an article. Or if you're talking posters, right, or ads, maybe have an alternative version of the copy ready, that type of stuff. Just literally sort of scenario planning and getting ready to move. And I think, Ash, that's also your point with the planning ahead, right? Just not be surprised by something that comes your way and then not being able to move on it. Because for us, often it's the more common scenario is missing an opportunity because you didn't prepare for something that was pretty clear would be coming.
We need to be in a proactive state. You can't really plan for everything. There is horizon scanning, there is like forecasting, all of that. But when you talk about being proactive, you have to be on the channels where these things happen. You have to be on the social channels, the digital channels, because these are the intersection points where you can literally mark for change, where you can literally see these things happen almost in real time. If you're there, you're able to like plan ahead and not just react as all the signifiers come in through all your other channels. You need to be at those spots to to see these out.
Yeah. And I think maybe to add to that, one last point, Brad, is an afterthought to answer your question, is maybe there is also some merit in just shifting content formats and increasing flexibility, or dare I say agility, hate that word, that way. Like if you need 3 months to do a research report and crank that out just to have some empirical data to back up the points because you're a consultant and that's what you do, yeah, okay, problem, right? But maybe you can host a couple of talks, so you can have a podcast out with serious experts from your firm in the moment saying, look, obviously this is a crisis, like in an example of COVID, right? We don't know what it's going, but we know from past experience, these are the 5 principles you should look at right now, right? You analyze the scenarios and you build one scenario that says, okay, if you literally have to crank something out in 2 weeks, how could we do that without losing every credibility, right? But how can we do something helpful and substantive, even if that means we have to do stuff a bit differently than we're used to? So, yeah. I do want to ask, though, if you'd have to give a tip for someone who wants to move towards playing this like the way you're doing it, what's a good way to start, or to build something similar to your service or capability? It's like with super simplistic measures. Can you give a tip there?
Yeah, sure. In terms of driving more data-driven content strategies in that sense, I would say, A, go where the people are to do your research. Understand what the search market is saying. Understand what the social market is saying. If you miss those 2 core components, you're missing out in what people are looking for and also how they are talking about it. I think all too often we get caught with our pants down of trying to define how an audience is talking about a topic, as opposed to going directly to that source and seeing that a language variation or a language change in wording might be everything you need to be part of that community, as opposed to being viewed on the outside of it. So go to the source, understand what they're searching for, understand how they're talking about it, to actually then learn about it and be embedded in it. once you have those two things, to your point of different types of content, think strategically of what type of content you want to put into market, where the message is, where it should go, what the audience is. Keep the core message of whatever you're trying to get at, but build it and actualize it in a different way within different channels. It's going to look different in Instagram as opposed to an email. It's going to look different in Twitter as opposed to TikTok, just the nature of the platform. But the core idea of what you're driving at is still there. So learn the topics for the search, learn how to speak to it, create planning and content over time that looks different, feels different, interacts in different channels where your audiences are, but aligns to your core goals. And then at the same time, think metrically what that means for you. If a message you put into market that you saw on social, the language, doesn't work, what is the tweak to that? What is the word variation? What is the content variation? What is the image variation, the video variation you want to put in there to say, all right, we learned this didn't work best, so let's do something else. Track it from the sense of, did this work, did it not work, and how do you change it based upon previous learnings and sort of a library of assets that you know maybe have performed better than other assets. But to that end, the biggest core thing of this is not being afraid to say something didn't work. Too often, as consultants, agencies, whatever it might be, you can have all your strategy ducks in a row, you can have all your execution ducks in a row, but when it comes to the conversation of did this work, a lot of agencies get cold feet because they don't want to say, oh, we put all this money to it and it didn't actually work well. That conversation needs to shift and say, it's not that it didn't work. It's that we learned something didn't perform as best in this audience as we thought it would. Yeah. So let's go another way. It's not being afraid to have the conversation. It's not money wasted. You're learning something.
You now understand that you can put this hypothesis to rest, right?
100%. So I think it's to your point, to do more data-driven content strategies, understand where people are, what they're looking for, understand how they're talking about it, plan out a content strategy around those two assets, build them differently to serve per platform, and then simply say, did it work, did it not work, and why? And build a learning program around that to say, all right, this piece of content needs to change here, this needs to change here, this CTA should be different, and let's continually learn and build that research process over and over and over again into your planning. And that's the way you learn more accurately and then perform more accurately.
Yeah. And I think that the over and over part is what I like most here. It's just not a one-off. It's not, we're starting a campaign, so let's do 2 weeks worth of research. So if someone asks, did you do research? We can say yes, but like sort of continue this throughout because you need to tweak stuff.
Well, I guess we can do not just like 2 weeks worth of research. It's just prepare. Like a good example would be before this pandemic happened, they had plenty of research and everything going on, saying that we are due for one, everything's going on. And in fact, they foresaw everything that happened 4 years in advance.
That's right. The Bill Gates TED Talk, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the Bill Gates TED Talk and things like that. And what is really sad is the governments of the world decided 2 years prior to the pandemic that, you know what, we don't need to put all this money into this. Let's just kill it, which is just absurd. So there is an element of like planning for this that doesn't really cost you a lot. It is about like phased, slow planning for contingencies.
Yeah.
All right, Brad, that was great. In closing out, we did mention your podcast, so we'll put that. We can put a link in the show notes so people can find that. Is there any other place where people can find you online, or where you want us to point people to if they're interested in hearing more about it?
I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, but my Instagram stuff is mostly just me and my family and doing nonsense there, so I wouldn't bother with that. But yeah, I think LinkedIn is fine. Yeah.
All right. Okay. This is great. Ash, do you have any remaining questions, or are we good to wrap this up?
There's no more questions from me, Flo. I think you can, wrap it up.
Yeah, I will. So thanks everyone for listening in. Thanks, Brad, for stopping by and educating us. It's a very interesting perspective, because we don't often talk to strategic people from the agency side who do this as their bread and butter. So thanks for that refresher there. And yeah, hopefully speak sometime soon. again.
Thank you
soon.
very much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Unbillable Hours. If you want more, tune in next week. You know where to find us.